G'day and welcome to the first of a couple of videos regarding germinating acacia seeds. I had been looking for some resources online for this, and there are a number of excellent research papers. I'll put some comments in, some notes in the comments below, particularly regarding the effects of hot water treatment, boiling water treatment on germination of Acacia Melanoxylon, which is one of the species that I am going to be potting up today. But first of all, a little bit of a shout out to, hopefully you can see that, the Nindithana Seed Service, which is where these seeds have come from. If you're in Australia and you're looking for seeds, this is where they've all come from. They came in this excellent little padded bag. The saltbush came in some nice desiccant, what looks to be sort of maybe vermiculite or sort of similar material for some pre-soaking. And each of these seeds came excellently packaged, sealed, and if you can have a look there, on the label, it actually also says what the pre-treatment should be, so HWT, hot water treatment / Scarify. So we'll be doing a little bit of that today, but I just wanted to, I'll let you know each of the species I've got. So I've got a couple of acacia species, and then I've got one eucalyptus species that needs a different treatment. But each of the acacia species have HWT / Scarify on there, and I've got Acacia floribunda, Acacia dealbata, Acacia I think it's Covenii, but I think they've cut off the Y, Acacia vernicuflua, Acacia melanoxylon, and Acacia baileyana, also sort of variant purpurea. So each of these have a seed number, and I'll put these all in the comments below for your interest. So one of the things in doing some reading regarding heat treatment for Acacia Melanoxylon, which is what we're looking at primarily today, because I'm going to copy a similar treatment for each of the others, is that you can expose the seed to hot water to open up the aperture and increase water uptake and nutrient uptake for the seed to germinate more effectively. You can also nick the seeds, which is different to scarifying. So today I'm going to actually be using a scalpel to nick some. I'm going to be using some sandpaper to scarify some, and we'll boil some hot water to show you just how HWT should work. One of the things that I thought I would highlight is a lot of people talk about soaking these seeds overnight, and that's fine, you can definitely do that. A lot of people will soak them in sea salt as well. They're quite large, so like in terms of actually manageability. So to give you some idea of sort of their size, if I can use just sort of this fairly standard biro next to it, so they're bigger than a biro tip, so you're not going to have difficulty per se handling them. Some of the smaller seeds, like let's say some of the eucalypt that I've got, you'll see that they are a lot smaller and they'll be more difficult to handle. So you might want to do this somewhere where you've got a nice smooth surface that's clean, and mostly so that you can both clean up and also move stuff later on. But if I just go back to the Acacia Melanoxylon seeds that I've got here, what we're going to do today is separate them out, and I'm going to do a couple of different treatments, and then I'll post the germination, post photos in a different video once they're up. But I'm going to do a couple heat water treatment and scarify, a couple heat water treatment on their own, a couple scarify on their own, and a couple of nicked seeds on their own. Back to my point about hot water treatment. The paper that I'll post the link to below in the comments, it doesn't actually say that you need to soak the seeds, and you don't need to expose them for long periods of time for the aperture of the seed to open up. In fact, more than sort of 60 seconds but less than 5 minutes didn't seem to have a great impact. Less than 60 seconds of hot water treatment exposure, or more than 60 seconds of more than 5 minutes of hot water treatment exposure either underperformed or could damage the seed by overexposing to hot water. So just once you've finished the exposure to hot water treatment, if you'd like to keep soaking them, the recommendation per the paper, at least for melanoxylon, is not to do that for a long period of time, like don't do 20, 30, 40 minutes of boiling water exposure. If you'd like to keep soaking them, then per the paper, it would recommend just soaking them in water yourself, which is what I intend to do whilst I get ready to pop this up. So I'll time-lapse this here and we'll have them out, and we'll do a couple of different treatments next. So just a reminder, we're doing some HWT and scarifying on Acacia Melanoxylon. Okay, so each of these piles is, I think there's 13, 12 and 12. So I'm going to do some heat treatment only, some scarify only, and some heat treatment and scarify. And after I've finished each of the treatments, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just let them soak in some cold water whilst I organise their pots. There's smaller ones than these downstairs, and then I'll show you how I pot each of these up. Well, potting's a strong word, but how I prep them once they're actually ready to go in some soil, and we'll discuss a little bit of soil mix for them in a little bit. But bearing in mind, you'd see I've got some tweezers. Probably shouldn't be handling these, mainly because depending on what you've been touching and the oils on your hands, and particularly if you've been washing your hands, they're not necessarily going to be that receptive to the chems that you've got. So, I should say I'm going to hot water treatment, some hot water treatment scarify, and then just some nicking some seeds. I won't hot water treat the seeds that I nick. It'd be too much exposure for the seed. But yeah, so we're going to do each of them a little bit, and I'll show you a little bit of each of the treatment once we get going. So this seemed like an appropriate mug, but in here I've got some boiling water, which I've just boiled, and what we're going to do is we're going to get a stopwatch, and that might seem like a bit of overkill, but it's actually not, given what we just discussed. And I'm going to put the seeds into the hot water, and we're going to make sure that we don't, once we do this, that we don't let them stay in there for any longer than 5 minutes. And we certainly want to make sure that we let them have sufficient exposure, so longer than a minute. Yep. So this might look painstaking, and that's because it is. So if you're not really interested in germinating, then you can buy seeds that have already been germinated by a specialist, and you can pay more for them, and you also won't have the enjoyment of that. So would you believe it's already been 40 seconds since I dropped the first one in? So we just want to make sure when we're looking in, it's actually really interesting. You can't see it unfortunately from your angle, but I won't lift you up because I don't want to ruin it. But two things. First of all, see if I can get a better angle for you. So it's been a minute since I dropped the first seed in. Couple of things. None of the seeds are floating, which is a good sign, because if they're floating, that's often a defect seed. You won't be able to see it there, but there are actually little air bubbles forming as the apertures are opening up on a couple of the seeds, which is great to see. You don't want to let them sit in the one spot for too long, because you don't know, well, you do know, but it's hard to actually manage it, where the aperture of the seed actually is. Just be very careful not to squish them, and just make sure you move them around a bit in there, just so that depending on how they've fallen into the mug or whatever you're using, it may affect the position of the aperture. So we've currently gone for 2 minutes, and so I'm actually going to take them out of them there now, and I'm going to stop the video so that I can take them out and put them in some cold water. So you'll notice this is a different coloured mug because I've now dropped them in some cold water as opposed to our boiling water mug. I'm going to keep using this for the second treatment for the Scarify and hot water treatment, so that this mug's fine for me to touch, but it will transfer the heat into the water. So you want to use a separate container to actually do that so that it's not continue to be hot. Now, one thing that is interesting is, and you might be able to see, you might not, there's already one seed that is currently floating. It's not necessarily the end of the world, but there's a good chance that that seed may or may not be going to work out, unfortunately. So we'll just have to see how it goes. I just sort of poked it below the surface there and it's dropped to the bottom, which is a bit of a better sign. And we'll let those seeds uptake some water while we scarify and prep the rest of the seeds. But I'm going to move this one away now for the moment, and we're going to put some more boiling water in and do our second treatment. Now, I should say before we crack on with the next sort of treatment, which is the Scarify and heat treat, is I forgot to mention, you should always be labelling everything. Now, look, Interfauna had excellent packaging, right? Fantastic. And certainly for the moment, I will probably be just attaching that packaging to the top. But just in case, it actually is important that you indicate what you're doing. So I've just written Acacia Melanoxylon HWT 2 minutes, and for the moment I'm just going to chuck that packet in the back of that because all these seeds are the same for the moment. So let's chat scarification. Here's some sandpaper, 100 grit, so sufficiently rough that if you rub your hand on it, it's going to be affected. So not so fine that you can't get any traction, not so rough that you're going to tear the seed to pieces, and we really don't need to do a lot of sanding. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to cut a small strip off the end. So you can see just how little I'm going to use. And I'm actually going to cut that in half so that I can use this as a base. And I might just weigh that down with the mug. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the seed on there. I'm going to get that and wrap it around my finger point like this. And I am just going to scratch it. That's not going to work, sorry. So I'll just hold it in place with the tweezers. And if I rub it back and forth there, I'm just going to scuff up the surface. Now, what it should look like is that you should see some scuffing of the surface. You might even see a tiny bit of like seed particle, sort of the coating coming apart. Right. And it should look like a little bit like what you find when you, when you rough your skin up on a surface, and you've just sort of taken that top layer off, but you haven't actually cut yourself. Right. So that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to soften, or not soften. We're trying to remove some of the hard seed coating for a couple of reasons. It's going to make our heat treatment more effective. And I mean, if you really wanted to keep going, you actually could just, you could keep doing this until you sort of got through the outer hard seed coating. I'm not particularly going to try and do that for a couple of reasons. Time, but also I'm going to actually heat treat these afterwards. So hopefully what you might be able to see is that there's just, and if you listen, there's just a bit of residue there. Yeah, so you won't be able, maybe be able to see that, but the surface of the seed is now noticeably scuffed, right? And so we're ready to chuck it in the boiling water. So same process as before, we're going to put it in here after I finish scuffing all these, and we're going to do that for over a minute but less than 5, and then we'll put it into cold water. And don't forget, keep them separate if you're doing like I am and you're testing different seeds. And then the last one I'll show you how to nick, but we'll come back in a second once I have finished this treatment. Okay, so I've finished all my scarification, and as I mentioned before, what you're going to want to do is make sure you keep using your boiling water mug and not another mug. And again, going to want to expose these guys and gals to the hot water more than a minute, but less than 5 minutes. So last time it was 210 from start. So just to keep consistency, I've got my stopwatch going in the background that you guys can't see, guys and girls can't see, but we will just make sure that we put them in for a good drink. Now it's interesting, there's one seed that may be bad, but you never know. So with these seeds, there's a lot of stuff to do with seeds that are floating won't work. But look, I think if in doubt, plant them, because once the others have sprouted, once you've sort of passed germinating time period that's expected germination, if it doesn't work, you're going to empty your seedling canisters anyway. So again, as I mentioned before, just make sure you move them around a bit, because you don't know how you've dropped them into the water per se, and you want to make sure that the seed is actually getting exposed to the hot water. But equally so, just like I said before, be very careful, don't squish them, so don't push down on them, just sort of gently stir them around. And then, as I mentioned before, you're going to use a second cup here in a second to make sure that you don't use the same one for the cold water soak post. Okay, so these ones are scarified and now they're going into a hot water treatment. So we're going to stop the video here and then cold water them. So just a reminder, because I nearly forgot, just make sure you always write your label. So in this case, Acacia Melanoxylon, and it is HWT 2 mins and Scarify. Okay, and we're done with this one. We're about to nick these seeds, so I'm going to put this mug away from view, but in the background is the seeds that we just scarified and hot water treated, and they're in their own mug of cold water, the same way the initial HWT seeds are. Okay, so you're going to notice 2 things, hopefully. The first is that there is some chunky paper here, and that is so I do not cut the table. The second thing is that this is not a green mug. So this is a different mug filled with cold water, and that is because we are about to nick these seeds, and I'm not chucking them into hot water after I've nicked them. A lot of people might suggest that you could still do a hot water treatment after you nick it. If you've successfully nicked these seeds, you have opened up the seed in the aperture sufficiently that hot water treatment is likely just to boil and damage the seed. So let's get our nicking correct. What you're going to want to do is, and I'm going to draw on here so that you can see, hopefully, is the seed will have a portion where it used to be attached to the tree, to the pod, silly. And then around the seed will be the flesh, and the seed coating, which is what we've just been scarifying. Now you hopefully will be able to see some of that. I haven't done a great job of drawing it, but the idea is that you want to nick the outside of the seed. So not the bit that used to be attached to the pod. So if this is the pod side, you want to nick on the end. Okay, so you want to cut across. So what you're going to need to look for is the shape of the seed, and most seeds will have a shape, because what you want to do is you want to cut the end off, right, and effectively open up the aperture of the seed the same way that we have just boiled it. So in boiling it, effectively all you're doing is you're breaking that open and allowing the seed, right, to have ingress of water, imbibation. But imbibation? Usually we refer to imbibing in terms of alcohol, but anyway, the seed needs to have water get into it. And so the goal with nicking a seed is to cut off part of the hard coating of the seed. But if you cut the seed coating in the wrong spot, and you'll have to excuse the plane that's going over from my very noisy flight path today, is that if you cut the seed in the right spot, you have effectively short-circuited the seed coating and are allowing water straight into the seed. Okay, so just you're going to have to look very closely, and these Melanoxylon seeds are sufficiently large that I can see the seed shape. I'll put a link online to different to the seed shape for this Melanoxylon, but bear in mind, understand, like, the smaller your seeds get. So I've chosen a lot of Acacia species to germinate, right, because I'm interested in these from a restorative agriculture perspective. But, you know, thankfully, the pre-treatment on this Eucalyptus stellulata is a cold stratify for 3 weeks. But my goodness, if you had to nick those seeds, wow, you'd have to be underneath the microscope. Just bear in mind, you will have to pay close attention. So I'm actually not going to try and watch myself nicking a seed, but I will tell you this, you will need tweezers, because you will need to hold that seed nice and firm, right, as I'm not demonstrating right now on camera. Right? You'll need to hold them very firmly, and always nick away from yourself, right? That way you can slide down. I might try and actually do one here. You can slide down, and all I've done is just cut the end off very, very, very gently, okay? Like I said, I've put some, just flick the seed off. So that's excellent. So there you go. You've just seen me stuff one up on camera, which is excellent. But yeah, you're going to want to make sure you just get the end. So I've just done that one successfully, so that can go in. But bear in mind, away from yourself, please, not towards yourself. A sharp implement like a scalpel or a box cutter, whatever is your preference, you know, in terms of your dexterity. But you're not going to want to do it towards yourself, away from yourself, okay? Anyway, I'm going to get on, and I'm going to nick these seeds and put it in here, and then we can chat. Sorry, I should say, I just realised I probably didn't quite explain, because I made a sort of exaggerated diagram here. You just need a tiny nick off the end. Like, it's called nicking for a reason. So you just need to nick it. It's kind of like how if you accidentally nick yourself, you have a tiny little cut, and it's enough to cause pain, and it's enough to cause a little bit of blood to come out, but it's the same with the seeds. They only need a little nick. And then if you've successfully nicked a seed, what you'll see when you put it into the water is you'll see air escaping from inside the seed. There'll be a little air bubble where you've nicked the seed. So you'll know if you've done it correctly or not. And I can see with the 3 here that I've done 2 better than 1, but we'll see. But I just wanted to re-emphasize how fractional that nick is. It's like you should just see the coating is just gone, and you can just see a new color underneath, but it shouldn't be too aggressive. And last but not least, important to make sure I've just prepped these. I wouldn't want to forget what they are. So, Acacia Melanoxylon, nicked. Alright, so we're going to let them soak for a little while whilst I have a cup of coffee, and then I am going to put them in a seedling tray and film that for you to watch as well. Okay, so you might have noticed that we've changed locations. I am now on a potting table affectionately known as the unstable table. It looks more stable than it is, but actually it's just a bit of flat board and some 4x2 knocked up. A couple of things, I have got some Saxon 24 cell tray inserts that came in a pack of 3. I actually also have a couple of Reco seeding trays underneath for a couple of reasons. These, as you would notice, are very, very flimsy. These are not. So it is easier for you to pick up an entire row if they're inside a tray, and also as well, depending on how long you let things go, expect to get some root coverage down below, and so separating them will be a little bit harder. I have actually given, before I put any mix in there, I have given them a bit of a mist in, just in case there's any dust. I've given them a bit of a wipe down. I should say, when I was up top, I was just using tap water for the boiling water treatment. Now that I'm about to actually pot them up and water them for the first time, I've actually got some Demon water. You can get that from any supermarket. I'm just not confident of the sort of, I've got an older house with, you know, various copper levels and that sort of stuff, so if I'm going to be watering these guys regularly and keeping them nice and hydrated over the course of a little bit, I think I'd rather be doing it with some Demon water. You don't have to, you can just, if you want to use your tap water or your irrigated water, if you think you've got good enough water quality, great. I'm just in a bit of an older house with some old copper piping and some mineralization, and you're not, I put this here because you're not going to want to drown them with a giant watering can. You are most definitely going to want a mister. They don't need a pile of water, and so, you know, you're going to want to keep them not damp, and certainly vaguely moist but not flooded. So this over them regularly will be sufficient, especially until they've germinated, and then we can move them on up into something a little bit bigger. But yeah, for now I'm going to get some mix. So you will probably not be able to see it, but I'm actually going to give them a combo of, and I'll put it down below, a half and half of Osmocote, Scott's Osmocote seed raising and cutting mix, which is useful in terms of seedlings, but it's usually quite nutrient intensive, and obviously Acacia Melanoxylon, this is an example, is a native, and it may not want as, you know, it may be quite overpowering if it's quite heavy phosphorus nitrogen. So I'm actually going to half and half it with a native potting mix, which is usually for the next stage, but just to dial back that nutrient level a little bit. So I've got 2 bags here of sort of 20 kilos, and I'll half and half it, and I'm going to fill one of these trays up, and then I'll show you how to plant the seeds next. Okay, so I have just filled these in, right? Makes it look a little bit easier when you just sort of get to stop the camera. I just wanted to highlight one thing. You definitely do not want to tamp down this soil. So if you can't see the dividers later on for seed raising, just get a clean broom, like one that you use for gardening, not for like chemicals, and just, you can broom the top off, right, so that you can see the grids, right? In fact, luckily I can see that you can see because of the reflection, that you can see the grids here, because, and make sure you want to use gloves, right? You don't want to be handling this soil with your bare hands. I've just taken this one off so I can touch my phone without getting soil all over it, but make sure you always use gloves when you're using this sort of mix, because you know, it'll make sure you don't want to get any of the sort of soil particulate, you know, if there's any sort of phosphates, nitrates, that sort of stuff in the mix, and also more importantly, you just be grubby everywhere. But yeah, you want to be able to see these dividers, because what we're about to do when I bring the seeds here is you can only put a certain number of seeds in each of these seedling squares. So we're probably only going to put about 4 in each until they start showing their monocot or dicotyledons out, and then we're going to take them out and put them in bigger pots like I discussed. But if you can't see the grid, you're not going to know how close you're planting them, and you don't want to put them right on the edge, because if they do get going, they're going to start hitting a root wall pretty quick, and it's going to be pretty depressing for them as a seedling to start doing that straight off the bat. So as I mentioned, this is a half and half Osmocote seed raising and cutting mix, and a native potting and planting mix, just so it's not too nutrient heavy for these little seeds. So I'm going to go and get the seeds and bring them down, and then we're just going to discuss seed depth, which is 2 parts of nothing. But yeah, we'll chat in a little bit. Alright, so we're back, and first one we've got, I'm not drinking tea, although that is an appropriate mug. So actually I am planting the heat water treatment 2 minutes seeds that we did first. And so basically I'll backload the amount of time in between these into planting these, and then the next one, and then the next one, and the next one. So they'll all have about the same amount of time soaking in cold water. So like we discussed before, and even more so now, if you wouldn't stick your finger in a raw wound, then do not stick your finger into these little seeds. It doesn't need to be hospital clean, but your grubby little mitts have nice oils and all sorts of other things, and depending on what you've been doing in the interim, like I have, it may not be suitable. You don't need your gloves this time, because we're going to use the reverse end of this, right, to poke a hole to put in the seed. Now, the seeds want to go in twice the depth of the seed size. So in this case, the seeds are about 5 mil. So you're going to want to put in the seed about, well, they're about 5 mil long and they're about 2 mil thick. So we're going to put them in somewhere between 2 and 5 mil. And you just, like we said before, you don't want to tamp down the soil and compact it, because that's not how the seeds would normally exist in nature. The soil would have a certain level of topsoil, it would be fairly loose, and as a result, you don't want to really sort of put the seed in and then pat the seed down. So grab one of the seeds after you have poked a hole. So in this case, we've got about 12 seeds here. I know I said I was going to do 4 per pod, but I think because these are 4 across and 6 down, 24, I think I'm going to do 3 per each. So I'll do a row of heat water treatment, a row of scarification heat water treatment, and a row of nicked, and then I can save the front 3 rows for another species, and so on and so on and so on. So first off, we're going to do 3 seeds, so we just want to get a little bit of space, right? So 1, 2, 3, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Save yourself the hassle and get all your holes ready, right? And look, it's not perfect. It's not, I mean, it is science, as in like we discussed, and I'll put the papers below on heat water treatment of seeds. But at the end of the day, don't forget, there's a whole bunch of work that goes into collection of these seeds before you even get them. So, yeah, germination rates are dependent upon not just what I'm about to do here and the pre-treatment I've just done. They're also dependent upon the seed collector. And I'm not saying that the seed collector I've bought them off is good or bad. We'll have to wait and see how they germinate and their germination rates, and I could have stuffed up the treatment. But I'm just saying, don't be too hard on yourself, right, when you're doing this, because it's not going to be as perfect as you think it will be. Right, so we'll drop our little man in there. Right, so no seed left. That's in there. And just make sure you got a good grip on the seed right before you pick it out of the water. Right. So I've just done 3 there. So I'll come back and do the rest, but just while I have you there, just so you can watch, all I'm doing is I'm just going to cover over the seeds now, right? I'm not going to tamp them down, right? I just want to make sure that they're covered over so they're not exposed, right? But I really don't need to go shoving that soil down on top. If you really feel like you haven't got enough, you could actually put a bit more soil, like seed mix, over the top, right? But do not push that down. Do not compact that. Don't push that seed too deep, and don't push it and compact it so the seed can't actually germinate. All right, I'm going to do the last ones, and then I'll take a photo of the 3 rows done, and then yeah, I'm going to finish off the rest of the species in here. And then my intention for you guys is, what I'll do, guys and gals, is I will take a photo every morning and night after I have finished these and covered them over. So just bear in mind, I'll take a photo at the end so you can see that they're covered over. It's not that they really, this time of year I'm planting in Sydney, Australia, in fairly warm conditions, so late spring, early summer. It's not super hot yet here. It has been a couple of days odd, but I'm inside and a covered shed, which keeps warm, warm during the day and warm during the evening. It doesn't have a massive temperature fluctuation because it's sort of under the house. But you will want to cover them over, just so that you can retain some moisture. And once I've planted all of these out, I'm going to give them another spray with the spray bottle, right? But again, no tamping down, just give them a spray, and then each day I'll come in, take off the covers, give them another spray. So I'm going to finish this out, and then I'll take a photo for you at the end of them all done, and with just some plastic cover. I'm not actually using a greenhouse cover, I'm just going to use some stakes and some Glad wrap, just for ease of opening and closing, and I can also reuse that Glad wrap. It's fairly easy to just keep using again and again. So yeah, bear with me, I'll get this sorted and then I'll take a photo for you. I should say, if you're particularly interested in the germination rates, then what I've done, just because you may or may not remember, I mean, you can write it down in your book, but it is useful line of sight visual, is I've actually just got the seed count for each pod. Might look like it takes up more space, but these markers are actually very, 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 very thin, so they don't really take up a whole bunch of space. And look, once these little seedlings get, like I said, even a monocotyledon or a dicotyledon, sort of the dicot out, like 2 little leaves, and I can see a differentiation. They're coming out of here anyway, so don't worry too much about overcrowding them. It's not likely to happen. There's plenty of space in here for those tiny little shoots to come up. Anyway. Okay, so I've watered this, and I've now Glad wrapped this. Now look, I haven't actually finished preparing the seeds for today, and I'm not going to come back to them. So what you're going to want to actually do is make sure that you don't leave soil uncovered, and let critters and other things get in there in advance of you putting your seeds. So definitely make sure that you cover up any of the soil that you've prepared, so that, yeah, there's no critters or anything there. In this case, I'm just literally going to lay some plastic over the top of it, right? I don't want it to be too like airtight, because it sort of still needs to breathe. There will be microbes in the soil and bacteria, and I don't want it to be totally anaerobic, so I'm not going to tuck it in massively. But yeah, I've got different species in here. I've taken a photo, so each day you can pull back the plastic, give them a spray, and yeah, we'll watch how they germinate. So thanks very much for watching, and any comments, questions below. I'll post a bunch of stuff in the notes. I'll try and do as longer show notes as YouTube will let me, particularly about supplies of things that I have got. So thanks very much.